I just wanted to say good evening and welcome everyone to talk about our consolidated action plan this evening. My name is Mary Witkowski. For those of you who don't know me, I work as the manager of the of Housing and Community Assistance. And I want to thank you for joining us, and we look forward to getting your feedback on how we're going to use our federal funds over the next 5 years of all of our different programs that the Community Assistance offers. Before we get started tonight, I wanted to introduce some of our guests. We do have Vice Mayor Barry Graham. He is in the back. He has the lovely 2 children who helped me get the meeting kicked off this evening. I also want to recognize some of our board and commission members. We have some members of the Human Services Advisory Board with us, as well as the Scottsdale Housing Governing Board. I'm not sure, but we also invited the Planning Commission and the Neighborhood Advisory Commission. So if any of you from those commissions, please stand up so that we can be recognized. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
And then I also wanted to take a moment and recognize the staff from the Housing and Community Assistance Office. If you guys could please stand. These are the actual people who carry out all of our activities that we use our federal funding for, and I could not do my job without their assistance and their knowledge and skill set. So given that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over, the presentation, to Eric Chatham. And he's with Civitas, who will be providing you information on our Consolidated Action Plan and our community survey and how you can participate and provide valuable feedback into our process.
Thank you, Mary. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here this evening. I also want to introduce with me Grace Orr and Maggie Blake with Civitas. We've been out here this week. We've got a couple more of these sessions tomorrow as well. We're helping Maricopa County and several of the other entitlement communities this week in a sort of a big joint effort. Commend you for how many people are here tonight. We did this in 5 locations last night for Maricopa County, including a virtual option, and we had a total of 3 people show up. 1 council member way out in Buckeye was at the facility, and then we had 2 people online that really never said a word, never participated, so it was pretty quiet. So thank you all for being here, whether you're elected officials or commissioners. Having this many people is significantly better than we had last night, so thank you. So again, I'm with Civitas. We're a consulting firm that helps cities and counties around this country that receive these funds from HUD. We're a HUD consulting firm, do a lot of these consolidated plans. So tonight I'm going to go over just the basics of what's required of the city and the counties and the other communities that receive these funds as far as the planning process. Going to share with you just a little bit of the data highlights that we've started to collect. We're very early in the process. As you can see on the screen, this is a plan that won't start till next year, 2025. And I know the city has just barely submitted or prepared the plan or the budget for the 2024 year, which is starting next week. So we're a full year out. We've got a long way to go in this planning process. So we're just now getting stakeholders and community members engaged. So this is, again, very early in the process. There'll be many times or many other opportunities, as I'll share later in the presentation, for people to participate, both residents, stakeholders, staff, etc. As Mary said, we've got a couple different surveys open. We'll make sure to share those linked in. I think everybody may have picked up a flyer as you were signing in. So please help us spread the word. If you didn't get a flyer, there's a flyer with a little QR code. We'll make sure everybody grabs one on the way out. And please help us spread the word. Post those in your offices, community centers, wherever else you might be able to share and spread the word. That'll be helpful. So with that, I'm going to dive into the presentation. So as you're probably aware, the city receives 1 grant from HUD directly as an entitlement community. Once Scottsdale hit more than 50,000 people, you were eligible to receive the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG grant. So you receive that directly through HUD every year, and it is for the city to determine how those funds are used. And so I'll go through some of the eligible uses for those funds and the annual allocation expectations momentarily. As a member of the Maricopa County Home Consortium, you partner with the county and several other communities like Scottsdale throughout the county that receive CDBG. You all combined receive another grant called the Home Program. And so the city receives via the county an allocation of those funds every year as well. So tonight we're focusing on those two grants. We realize the city has a lot of other grant making with general funds and state programs and other federal programs. But this plan is really just focused on how the city will use those two funds for the next 5-year period. For those of you that are involved in the planning commission or other activities, you're probably familiar with the comprehensive planning process or the general plan that you might do, maybe every 5 to 10 years. This is a very similar process where we take a look at the demographics and housing and community needs and set a plan for how we're going to use these funds for the next 5 years. So on the screen, I'll step to the side so you can see this. And of course, the presentation will be made available online as a PowerPoint, and obviously we're recording as well. So you can see it, the members of the Home Consortium are listed here on the top right. So those communities, all similar to Scottsdale, receive CDBG directly and then partner with the county to receive funds through the home program. The communities listed on the bottom right are currently below the threshold. I understand Buckeye is about to be large enough, and as you all well know, there's probably a lot of other communities that will eventually hit 50,000 the way the county is growing. But the counties the cities on the bottom right there do not currently receive the funds directly, so the county administers these programs on their behalf within those jurisdictions, at least until they're large enough to receive them. So generally speaking, these two grants are primarily used to create affordable housing and provide for community development needs for low to moderate income households, elderly households, homeless or otherwise special needs individuals or families in our community. So I'm going to go through some of the eligible uses of each of the programs. So the CDBG program is, of course, the largest grant that we receive from HUD. It's much smaller allocation of home. But it's certainly the most flexible use. So we're able to, and this is not to say that the city has to, but you're able to use these funds to make public facility improvements, libraries, community centers, senior centers, do a lot of, you can do sidewalk improvements, road paving, neighborhood parks and neighborhood centers, those sort of things. We can use funds to help homeowners and potentially landlords renovate housing for low-income individuals. So there's a lot of emergency repair programs for low-income families or seniors. We can fund public services, so social service programs, and then currently the city uses those funds and kind of focuses on homeless social services or supporting services. Funds can be used for economic development, helping small businesses or helping get people trained for job readiness or to create or expand businesses here in Scottsdale as well. So that's our most flexible source. And then, of course, the city can take up to 20% of the funds each year to fund admin. And, of course, you need that to be able to staff the department and run the programs effectively. On the home program, again, much smaller allocation that we receive through the county. You take a little bit for admin to, again, administer the program. Generally speaking, those funds are all about housing. Whether it's development of affordable rental or ownership housing, or you can provide financial assistance. You can provide purchase assistance to potential home buyers or rental assistance to low-income families to avoid eviction. But the home program, as it sort of sounds in the name, is all about housing, so it's not nearly as flexible, if you will, compared to the CDBG program. So let's talk about the requirements for this consolidated plan process. So the program has been in existence for 50 years. This is the 50th year of CDBG. Every 5 years, HUD requires the grantees to take a pause in your program, evaluate the needs of the community, evaluate your housing stock, your community centers, your facilities, your infrastructure needs, and then sort of reestablish the priorities for how you're going to use those funds for the next 5 years. So our intent here is to evaluate the current programming, make sure it's still what we want to continue doing, or if there's changes that need to be made, other programs that we want to start, maybe programs that aren't quite effective, we want to maybe look a different direction. Now is the time to do that. In some cases, there are programs that we know we've been doing well for many years, and without a doubt, those are going to continue, and that's okay. So it's not to say you have to throw everything out and start over. but you want to do a sort of a check-in, if you will, every 5 years. So with that, we're going to establish the priorities and the goals for how these funds will be used in Scottsdale for the next 5 years. And that will essentially guide or dictate our funding decisions for that 5-year period. So it'll cover the 5 great years or fiscal years from 2025, starting next July 1st, through the end of the 2029 year, which is actually into calendar year 2030. So there are 5 major components of the consolidated plan. Our team has started the needs assessment, which looks at the needs of the community, the residents. We're also looking at the housing market analysis. I'm going to share just a few data points of that momentarily. Eventually, when those 2 sections are done and we have completed all the feedback, we will establish the strategic plan where those priorities are established. And then every year of those 5 years, you're probably already familiar, but the city establishes an annual action plan, which is really your budget for the first year. So part of this plan will establish the 2025 budget, and then you'll associate the next 4 action plans back with this. So you can see the allocations on the bottom left, just over $1 million in CDBG. That's what the city has received this year. So generally speaking, these are flat funded programs at the federal level. It actually took a little bit of a reduction nationwide on both programs this year because of so much of the COVID stimulus funds. So many grantees still have a lot of that backlog. So HUD reduced, or Congress really reduced the allocations this year. Hopefully they kind of go back up for 2025. But just over $1 million for CDBG. Again, that's our most flexible program. And then currently $355,000 in home. Again, that comes through the county for the city to determine how we use it. So as we're developing this process, we're obviously starting with community outreach now to gain feedback on the needs assessment. After the holiday week next week, we're going to be doing sessions with the other member communities, entitlement communities here in Maricopa, to meet with a variety of nonprofit organizations that provide services and housing developers, public housing authorities, etc. We're going to be meeting with those groups directly over the next few weeks after the holiday. So we're getting feedback from residents, from elected officials, from staff, and from nonprofit and other stakeholder organizations. We'll develop the draft plan, and then next spring, this will be published for public review, the 30-day public comment period. And then eventually next spring, we will submit for HUD's review, ideally about next May, hoping that Congress and the president can sign a budget on time. That didn't go real well this year if you're paying attention. But hopefully, on an ideal situation, we have the budget early in January or so that we can budget and do our plan in the spring, get that submitted, and be ready to rock and roll as of July 1st. So a few of the data highlights, and if you don't mind to grab a sip of water. So what we're trying to look at, really, rather than one data set or one data point, is really the trends of the population and the housing market over the last decade. Of course, this is going to be a 5-year plan, so it's not really necessary to have the particular data point. What it is right now, we're trying to project what the trends are going to be so we can plan for the future. But over the last 10 years, you all well know this better than we do, but population has certainly increased throughout the valley, almost 10% here in Scottsdale. The number of households has increased. That's a 15% increase. As a researcher, just a quick math here, just a quick look at the population's only going up by 10%. The number of households going up by 15%. Simple math tells you that the household size is getting smaller. So it might have been 3 people on average. Now it's getting smaller. So as the population grows, we're actually needing more housing units, but for fewer people per unit. So as we're looking for what type of units to build, the trend would tell us we don't need big units necessarily. Not to say that nobody wants big units, but they're smaller households. We need to keep that in mind. What are people really looking for? Median income I'm from South Carolina, so when I see a median income of $104,000, that's a pretty affluent community. But I realize throughout Maricopa County, incomes are pretty high out here. That's a 44% increase over the last decade. So, hey, that sounds really good. But let me show you the next slide. Housing costs are increasing at a higher rate over the last decade. So median home values have certainly increased. Oh, sorry, we've got, I skipped ahead. I hate standing with my back to you, so I can't read. So here's the population in poverty. So poverty rates, as it relates to income, poverty rates are actually decreasing throughout the country. Certainly here in Arizona and in the county, in Scottsdale, poverty rates are decreasing. So that's great. Our programs, as I mentioned in the introduction, are primarily focused on low to moderate income households. What HUD defines as low to moderate income as being a household at 80% of the area median income or below. So for Scottsdale, we're using the Phoenix, Mesa, Scottsdale metro area incomes. So you can see what 80% is adjusted for household size. That's kind of small and low there. But for example, a household of 4, 80% of the median income is an income of $82,000. So we're not talking about poverty level households. We don't really have that many poverty level households in Scottsdale. We're talking about programs that can assist families up to $82,000 in income, that's a pretty healthy income anywhere in the country. In the map on the right-hand side, the darker shaded areas indicate higher concentrations of poverty. You see it in the north and then a few areas in the extreme south of the city. Okay, now to the housing costs. So while incomes are increasing, poverty rates are decreasing. That sounds good from a financial standpoint, but home values and rents are skyrocketing over the last decade. They are everywhere in the country. I know you guys that have lived here, you're seeing it even worse right here in the Phoenix, in the Valley area. Median home value, we're using census information, just by the way. So again, the most recent available census information is still 2022. We know that numbers are even higher than that if we're pulling real estate data. But HUD requires us to use census information. So the median home value from the census information in 22 said $651,000. We know that it's higher than that now. We're trending higher and higher. But that was a 64% increase in the last decade. So when incomes are only increasing at 44%, home values, home costs are skyrocketing. And median rents have gone up almost 68% in that same time. So rents and home purchase or home cost for homeowners is certainly outpacing income improvements. So with housing and urban development funding, of course, we're looking at housing affordability for all of our residents. HUD considers a family to be cost burdened if you pay more than 30% of your income towards housing cost. So this is one of the bigger indicators that we're looking at is can people afford the house that they're in? And generally speaking, Scottsdale is better off than a lot of other communities here in Maricopa County, across the country, really. But still, 23% of your homeowners, the people, they already own their home, almost a quarter of them are paying more than 30%, and 11% of them are paying more than 50% of their income towards housing. That's considered severely. So 11% of your homeowners are paying half their income towards housing costs. And it includes mortgage, insurance, taxes, etc. But when you think of the impact that has, or the financial strain that causes on the family, they're at risk. One pandemic, job layoff, short-term income hiccup, so to speak, and this family is certainly at risk of foreclosure. They've got very little discretionary funds to pay for unexpected medical expenses or auto repairs or etc. So these are the households, if you will, even on the home ownership side, that are extremely vulnerable when it comes to housing stability. It gets worse for renters, of course. On the renters side, again, rents have increased in the last decade by 68%. So more than a third, 36% of all your renters pay more than 30% of their income. And so I know as a community, we're probably trying to encourage more home ownership opportunities, but renters in our community that are paying more than a third of their income have very little opportunity to save, certainly when home values are increasing at the pace they are. When you look at severe cost burden for renters, almost 20%, 1/5 of all your renters are paying 50% of their income towards rent. Again, these households or these families are at extreme risk of eviction and homelessness with any kind of interruption in their income or an unexpected expense like a medical expense or something like that. So in addition to the consolidated plan, the county and all of the member entitlement communities are also taking this opportunity to do a fair housing assessment. HUD also requires every 5 years for grantees to take an assessment of fair housing conditions, fair housing complaints, fair housing rights of our residents and see if we're on track, if fair housing is being promoted and enforced properly, or do there need to be extra efforts in moving forward. So the requirement by law through these programs is called affirmatively furthering fair housing. So that means as a stipulation of receiving these funds, Scottsdale not only has to just enforce the law, but make sure that the law is being promoted and tenants and landlords and homeowners know the rights. Property owners, property management companies, real estate agents, HOAs, all of these organizations know what is, the Fair Housing Act or fair housing laws. And so the city has to take effort to promote that and make sure that our residents are aware. So, sorry, go back one. So in the fair housing assessment, we're doing this at the county level. So in this fair housing assessment, we're going to go more in depth in doing community profile, looking at demographics for the county, as well as a deeper dive into the housing market compared to what's required in the consolidated plan. But we're also looking at public programs and policies that impact fair housing or fair housing opportunities. We also are required to look at the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act or HMDA analysis. All mortgage companies of certain size are required to report back to the federal government all of the loan applications that they have received. And if they deny those loan applications, what are the primary reasons for denial? If they've approved them, then what were the primary reasons for approval, or what allowed them to approve those? Through this fair housing analysis, we're going to look at trends for why people are denied at different incomes, at different races, to see if there are any trends and why people might be being denied mortgages here in Scottsdale and really throughout the county. So throughout this promotion with our residents, we really want to, in the Scottsdale and the Home Consortium, really want to continue to promote fair housing rights. I think everybody is pretty familiar with the protected classes, so you can't discriminate in housing based on any of the protected classes. I think everybody is fairly well aware of that, but they don't understand what the requirements are and who has to follow them. And so I think a lot of people think, of course, big rental properties, big apartment complexes have to abide by this. But we overlook real estate agents, mortgage brokers, insurance companies, HOA boards, neighborhood associations. The Fair Housing Act they're subject to the Fair Housing Act as well. So throughout this process with community engagement, we're going to continue to promote this, make sure people are aware of this and know if they think they've had the housing rights violated, they know where to go to seek assistance or potentially file a claim or a complaint. So moving into the community input, I'm going to just kind of share some ideas of what kind of input we're looking for, and then I'll open it up to you guys if you have comment tonight. Again, certainly we encourage you to help us take the survey and spread the word on the survey. And again, there'll be other opportunities, so I don't mean to have to put anybody on the spot. But we're trying to identify these community needs. So with these two funds that we receive, again, it's only about 1.4 million total. We've got very limited options on what we can do with the home program. A little more flexible with CDBG, but again, it's only $1 million. So we're not going to resolve all the problems every year. So how do we prioritize with these very limited funds and kind of narrow window of what's eligible? How do we prioritize? So we're looking for feedback on the needs of Scottsdale, not only currently, but what we think we're projecting the needs in the future. Of course, if we have a housing shortage now, we're not going to build houses overnight. It's going to take years to be able to develop those houses. So what are we looking for in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and really to some extent further out? So we want feedback on public facilities, services, and other programs that might be needed. Again, maybe these programs already exist, and so the response is, or the feedback is, these are great programs, we need to continue to support them. Maybe the programs don't exist, or people would like to see programs created, established, or expanded. So we appreciate that kind of feedback as well. We want feedback on the type of housing and any other housing issues or problems that residents feel. You know the housing situation, you've moved about, you've all identified housing one way or the other by purchasing or identifying a place to rent here in Scottsdale. So through those experiences, we want to learn more about, is the housing stock appropriate? Is it not appropriate? Do we need more of one type or less of another type of housing moving forward? Again, we need that feedback. My team can pull all the data and do housing market analysis and tell you what the stock looks like and what the trends are and what the developers are wanting to build, but we really want to hear back from the community as well as to what the community would like to see as the community continues to grow. And finally, on the fair housing side, if our residents feel like there have been violations or they're unaware of these, or they have family members or friends that have had experienced fair housing violations or discrimination, we'd like feedback on that so that we can help promote moving forward. Perhaps there's nothing we can do about it if situations were in the past, but being aware and being able to promote and making sure people know where to go in the future. So we need that feedback to see if there is a prevalence of any kind of discrimination. So I'll pause here a moment. We all got used to using the QR codes during COVID, so we're going to take advantage of that. There's an online survey. We have paper copies if anybody would rather take it that way, but you can scan with your phone and take that online survey. It's mostly multiple choice and some ranking order, and then at the end there's a few where you have the ability to provide an open sort of narrative response. Certainly don't have to take it tonight. We're going to leave it open at least for a couple months. The QR code is also on the flyer, so if you'd rather just grab a flyer and do it back at the house, that's fine. And again, to help us spread the word with your neighbors and colleagues. The Civitas team is going to continue with Mary and her team to do the needs assessment, the outreach to stakeholders, continue with community outreach as well, and doing the data collection, mapping, and to complete the needs assessment and market analysis. When we have all of that compiled this fall, we'll be identifying those priorities. And then hopefully, again, based on Congress passing a budget, in budget for the 2025 cycle early next year. So hopefully, ideally, around January, we'd be able to publish that and seek comment back. So we'll have a 30-day public comment early next spring on the proposed plan, and there'll be a public hearing. I know there'll be the presentation will go through the different commission bodies. So there's, of course, a lot of opportunity to see the final product presented in later in both in this year and when we get ready with the budget in 2025. So again, there's opportunities now and in the future when we got the draft plan for people to provide feedback. You can provide feedback directly through the survey, but also on the screen here, we can receive written. I know nobody really sends letters anymore, but you can send a letter to Mary's office. We can take written comment back that way or via email. So throughout this process, there's a lot of opportunity, and we'll be scheduling phone interviews and Zoom interviews with a lot of stakeholders, and happy to do that with anybody that would like to speak, sort of in a one-on-one situation with myself or Mary and her team. So with that, I'm happy to open the room to any questions you might have on the process or the plan, and certainly any feedback. Again, don't necessarily need to put anybody on the spot, but welcome a conversation if you'd like to have that or provide comment. And I think I'm okay here. So for the sake of the recording, and then we're going to publish this, I'll pass the mic around if you want to use that.
Yep. Thank you for your presentation. Question about the survey. How is that being circulated through the community so that we get the greatest amount of penetration, the greatest number of people completing the survey?
I'll let Mary answer that one.
Commissioner Lurie, it is, and everyone in the audience, it is currently out on Facebook, on some of our Instagrams. It is being hosted on the city website, and we'll be continuing to market it throughout the middle of August. We will be working with the communications office to hopefully also send out an email to residents through our Speak Up Scottsdale portal as well.
And I'll just add to that we will have two versions of the survey. So the one we're sharing tonight is geared specifically for residents of Scottsdale, and the questions are worded asking you as a resident. We'll have a second survey, very similar questions and seeking similar feedback, but the questions are oriented for stakeholder, responding on behalf of your organization, the clients you serve, whether you're a developer or a nonprofit organization, another department in the city or the county. Responding that way. So two ways to provide feedback. So I know that we have a lot of, representation of different commissions or bodies. So that might be appropriate as well, the stakeholder survey. We're releasing that one after the 4th of July break when we start having those sessions with those groups.
So you said you're doing the assessments not only for Scottsdale but for other cities in the valley, and I'm not real familiar with how the process works regionally. I would be interested, for example, in whether our rates of cost burden households are higher or lower than adjoining cities, and I'm wondering whether in putting together this plan, is there some consideration of what's happening in neighboring communities and maybe how Scottsdale should be responding to that as well.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, sir. Absolutely. So yes, our team is working with the county. Can you go back to sort of the second slide with all the list? We are actually working with all of the members. Give us 1 second, I'll pull back up the list. But we're working with all of the members of the home consortium to complete this plan. So we all have the same timeline. We're all on the same annual cycle, if you will, in the same 5-year cycle. So everybody is effectively doing something similar to this. We have colleagues that are over in Avondale tonight doing this session. I'll be in Peoria tomorrow night doing the same thing. And we met with, what did we do earlier? We're doing Chandler in Gilbert a little bit later in this summer. I think we're coming back in August to do those. But so everybody in the top right here receives CDBG directly. They all have to do something very similar. So all those same data points are being pulled. They'll be in that big fair housing assessment where we get a deep dive at the county level. So we'll show cost burden for everybody. We do these all over the country. Our team probably does 40 or 50 a year all over the country. We're in Denver Metro. We do a lot of those communities. We're in the Northeast. I live in South Carolina. We do a lot there. And we do a lot in South Florida. For whatever reason, the cost burden here is the percentages are much lower, quite frankly, than everywhere else we work. Almost all of the places in South Florida and in the Northeast, 50% of the renters are cost burden, meaning they pay more than 30%. So it's, when I see a renter, 30% still high, which, I think we were 36% here. That's still high. That's a lot of households that can't afford where they're living. But we often see half the renters, and we often see 20 or 30% of the renters paying 50% of their income. So severely cost burden. That is unfortunately quite common. I think what is happening in Maricopa generally, and certainly here in Scottsdale and some of your adjoining or adjacent communities, you're already a little bit more affluent. So as it's growing, quite frankly, the price points were already a little higher, demanding a little bit higher income to move in. And you haven't, folks aren't moving in here that can't afford to move in here. That's the only blunt way to say that. So your cost burden, because there wasn't an opportunity for that. But as people are spreading out throughout the valley and more people are coming, I'm picking on Mary, but as more people move from Wisconsin and Ohio, the cost burden is going to go up. The housing stock is not, if population is coming, the housing stock's not being built, and the housing population or family size is shrinking. So we need more units, quite frankly, everywhere in the country. And most of the country took a 2-year pause. You guys and where I am in South Carolina, we got back to normal a little quicker than everything else. But still, we took 18-month pause on building. And so we were already slow in housing development. And we're not even talking about like affordable housing, just housing in general. We were already slow paced before COVID, and we took 18 months off. We were way behind across the country. It's just a population grows. And again, as household size shrinks, we need more units. For the same amount of people, we need more units than we used to. Average household size, 20, 30 years ago was easily 3 or 4 people. We're down to barely over 2 now. And in some places we see it's under 2 people per household. That's really the statistic I'm looking at is your population is growing by 10%, but your number of households is going by 15%. No, that's not a real simple, that means we're shrinking, but simple math says we're shrinking at least a little bit, right? We've got more households. It's not a bunch of new people. Yes, ma'am. There's a lady in the back. I'm going to come back to you.
Is there a correlation with the age?
Correlation with the age?
Age of where the shrinking population, are they seniors or are they? That makes sense.
Yeah. We're seeing a decline in household size at all ages. At all ages. Again, COVID kind of threw us all for a loop. We had a lot of kids moving back in, or older kids, if you will, moving back in with parents during the economic situation. But I think as people are moving back out of the household, you're seeing, again, much smaller households. I'm a household of 2. My colleagues here are households of 1. That's just quite typical. We just don't have a lot of large households anymore. And again, that's not to say that we don't have any. But the economics of it says nationwide we're trending towards smaller household size. Yeah, and sir, gentleman here would have.
Thank you. One very quick question, and then one that'll probably hopefully require a little more input from you and or from Mary. On the upper right-hand column under Home Consortium, I was curious why Mesa is not there. That's one question. The longer one, I guess it's longer, but the other question is, those of us who serve on Human Services Commission of the Housing Authority Board, I think, are really very, very pleased with the process that we go through working with staff and providing whatever input we can to the way in which the limited amount of dollars are allocated. My question is it something that Civitas can bring to the table, or is it something that city staff brings to the table to help us understand sometimes we don't know what we don't know? That is to say, what are other places, whether here in Arizona or anywhere in the country, what are they doing that's bold and different and really thinking outside the box to address the issues that concern us all? And is that something that we gain from our involvement with you, or is it something staff is constantly looking for?
Great.
Thank you for your comments, sir. Let me address easily why Mesa is not involved. You didn't ask about Phoenix, so I guess everybody realizes Phoenix is a big dog. They'll do what and we'll leave them alone. Mesa is large enough population-wise where they receive CDBG and home directly. So they don't need to participate with us. Now, Civitas is working with Mesa. They're also on the same schedule, and they're doing this same plan as well currently. We're coming back out in August to do these meetings with Mesa. So they're doing the same effort, but they just received these funds, and so they don't have to cooperate with the rest of us if they don't want to, from HUD's perspective. The second question, if you will, we met with staff this week, and we're learning more about Scottsdale and the programs that you run. One of the first things I recognized with meeting with staff this week is how many other programs that are not HUD funded programs that Scottsdale is funding through general funds, state funds, other federal programs, whatever that might be that's coming through, and through running the housing authority through the city. I mean, that you've taken that responsibility. A lot of places don't want anything to do with public housing, and I don't want it. We're not going to run it. Nobody's going to run it. So the one thing I would say that's bold is you guys are funding a whole lot of other things. So you're addressing the issue in providing other funding. I mean, there's not an application process to HUD to get more money. Like you can't call Congress and, I mean, if they don't add more money at the federal level, we don't get more money. So it's not something that Scottsdale could do to get more money out of these programs. So you've identified those needs and you've added to them tremendously from my initial review. So that's one thing. And then really the other thing, and again, yes, we're working with staff on these kind of concepts, but linking all those programs together. Mary talks about, maybe you've heard this, sir, being on the commission, but what's called in the housing world a move-on strategy. So you're homeless now, but ultimately, if we want to get you to home ownership, there's 15 steps in between. From what I could tell, Scottsdale is trying to identify all of those options or all of those steps and providing for support throughout the way. So it's not just we got you off the street and we forget about you. We're trying to help you get all the way up to home ownership if that's appropriate for you, and that's something that the family wants to do. So, I mean, putting those linkages together and knowing which programs is next, and then really identifying the priority use of, well, these funds are better suited down here, these funds are better suited up here. I mean, I think that's the ongoing challenge that places have. A lot of places say, well, we only have this one grant. We're going to just fix a park. That's all we can do with it. We're not real strategic. It's just, well, that's eligible and we need to fix parks. So that's what we're going to do. And that's their priority. Maybe it is. But from my perspective, you guys have thought a little more critically about it. Again, we're just getting engaged with you guys, but I think you're already a little more putting a lot more thought into the big picture of housing and community development needs compared to other places we work. What, ma'am, did you have a question?
It's not a question. I think part of the problem are short-term rentals, because that certainly takes away of people being able to buy a house for them or family. And we're really trying to work with the state. The state has control over this, and we're having problems because the city can't do anything that the state doesn't allow.
That short-term rentals is definitely something that we're looking at in all of our housing studies around the country. Grace and I live in Charleston, South Carolina. I mean, that's the number one issue, if you will, on housing affordability is that housing unit, that structure is much more valuable to a property owner that can rent it out for $10,000 a week on Airbnb. And people will pay that in Charleston, no problem. And they're paying that, right? With you guys, they're paying that kind of number as well. So when you just look at what is a housing unit worth to somebody that can generate that kind of rent, I mean, there's very few homeowners that could compete with that. So the values are being driven up, not because of what the structure should be worth, just the physical material in the land, but because what it generates at rent. And of course, that's how we look at apartment complexes. That's how they're valued. How much revenue do they generate? Not what the sticks and mortar are worth. Unfortunately, now we're getting in a lot of single family type housing that has that same new valuation. And that's a large part in places where, like where you are, like where I am, that is a large factor in the significant increase, the big jump in home value in it. It's not really home value at that point, right? It's a rental value for recreational property, that's having a big impact nationwide. I think people love it because, hey, I can generate some revenue and you know, rent out my basement or rent out my, you know, my spare room. You got those considerations, but you also have consideration. Normal families can't compete with investors that can make that kind of revenue. And investors will just scoop them up because they're paying cash because they know what they're going to get in return. It's impossible to keep up. Sorry, yeah.
I'm curious if you have this problem for your senior housing that we are developing more here. Our seniors have lived in many of these southern area apartments in Scottsdale for many years, some 15, 20, now 30 years. LLCs are coming in and buying up the units in the townhouse complex or the condo complex. Once they reach 51%, they then are assessing for pools and roofs and all kinds of amenities that raise the rent so high that our seniors are being displaced. When you're displaced after 15 and 30 years and so on, you are not going to be aging in place. And once they are out of those units because they can't stay, they look around the valley, and you will soon see in your assessments, there isn't anywhere they can afford to go. We do not have mobile home parks, as many as we used to have in the valley. Mesa has more. But is this a problem across the country?
Yeah, I think it definitely is. Again, because investors are looking at how they can make the value, how they can increase value on rental property or just housing in general. So it's a lot cheaper for an investor to buy an existing structure, buy 10 existing structures, and then be able to flip the neighborhood, as you're describing. We see a lot of this in the Denver metro area as well. And we do a lot of work in Broward County, South Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood. I mean, it's rampant down there. They'll buy a whole condo community in a week. And what happened? It's because, as you're describing, if they do an assessment, they get a pool, they improve the landscaping, they do a facade improvement, they can increase the values and the rents extremely quickly for relatively low investment. I mean, they bought the units, but it's a little lipstick, really. They're not developing something new. But the problem with that, the reason they're doing this, because there's just no more land. Everybody wants to be here. There's no more land to be had unless you keep going. I mean, Buckeye is about to be CDBG entitlement community. They're way out there. I don't know. I mean, we were there yesterday. That's a long way out there. And there's 50,000 people there. I mean, so it's just sprawling. I grew up in Atlanta, so I saw the sprawl like crazy. But people just keep going and keep going and keep going. But in the desirable communities where we're out in, that's what investors are doing.
So are the programs for a senior where the money, I mean, it's going to be long-term for some of these seniors. And for Scottsdale, they had a program that we would future and help with the rent. It's just not feasible at $1 million.
I think Mary has I can address how the HUD programs can do it, but I think Mary may have other comments.
In November of this year, the Community Assistance Office kicked off our tenant-based rental assistance program through the home funding, and it is assisting those seniors who are 30% or below the area median income and more than 50% cost burden. So some of those seniors that are currently being displaced, we do accept referrals from the senior centers and are getting them into housing. And then after a period of 2 years, they will bridge on to our Housing Choice Voucher Program for permanent assistance. It's a small step.
He's enough funded for that.
No, we're at about 10 or 15 people is about who we can help a year. So it's lipstick, but it's at least putting out a little gloss with it.
And these funds, again, we're very limited, but CDBG and home funds can be used to acquire those units. So where you see competition for those properties and you know what's about to happen, they're trending to flip that community. Perhaps it's the housing authority or other nonprofit or affordable housing developers can acquire those properties and maintain them affordable. When the city is involved or these federal funds are involved, you're typically putting some sort of restriction on the property, whether it's a lien or a land use restriction of some sort to make them stay as affordable for 15, 20, sometimes 30 years. So if we see that, of course, with a lot of new construction. Right now, the state's focused with their big dollars on affordable housing and multifamily, rental apartments in large scale. But these funds that we receive locally can be used to buy up 1 or 2 units at a time, maybe duplexes or condos, etc., and maintain them as affordable. The problem there is, again, we just don't have enough money to do that at scale. So how can we help more families? Well, the short term is tenant-based rental assistance, but in the long term, we got to continue to look at the full spectrum of solutions. Yes, rental assistance is needed immediately to address the current situation, but the situation is not going to change at the market unless we do something about the housing. I geek out on this. I'm happy to stay till midnight, so you guys are going to have to stop me. And I'm not going home till Friday, so I wish. Not yet. No, I saw some guys playing on our drive over. I was like, there's no way. No way. Any other comments, questions? Thank you for those of you that have provided feedback. That was a great conversation. Happy to have anybody else.
Well, I got a comment as just a resident. I'm a 54-year resident in Scottsdale, and I've always been extremely proud of how our human services program have been. As you say, you're recognizing we have more programs than most people. And when we can't handle a program ourselves, we work with Phoenix to provide them with funding to help with some programs or coordinate with them. So as a resident, I'm very proud of what we try to do. I just wish that we had more financial help for it. We don't have the land. We don't have the economic level for a lot of people to be able to live in Scottsdale, and those that do and that are getting more and more cost burden. I have a member on my board who is a young man with a child in a rental. He has 2 bedrooms. He's paying over $3,200 a month for it, and it's the least expensive they could find so that their daughter could go to a good school district. And it is sad. It's sad for families. We need young kids.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. So again, I want to point back to when I showed the slide about renter cost burden, and I showed you median rent. I mean, that's not to say clearly that if you were going to look for an apartment this afternoon, what you could find available. That's a lot of housing units that people have been renting for decades. So half the houses are renting for less, half for more. But the new stuff that's coming available is certainly not at the median. That's stuff that people have locked in and they're renting from grandma, and they have been for, so I mean, that's in the factor. That's what's in the census information, is all of those types of rents as well. But again, and it's the same thing with the home value, the home price for home ownership. The number I showed you, if you're going to look to buy a house today, that's probably not the number you're seeing on the listings. But that takes into account all the houses in Scottsdale, what they're worth, not what you could buy a house for today. So I know there's numbers, I'm showing you the medians, values, and rents. That's kind of misleading. I understand that. That's not what you're going to get today if you're going out, if you're a renter or trying to, find a good place for your kids to go to school. You're not going to find the median. The people here already have that locked up. The new stuff that's coming open is at the newer rates. 3,200 is crazy. Anywhere in the country, that's absurd. Anyone else?
PowerPoint is available.
Mary definitely has a copy of it. I don't mean to speak for her, but I presume we can get it out certainly, sir, if requested. I know the guys are filming it, so I presume the video will be posted online as well.
Honestly, you can grab one of my cards. You guys can grab one of my cards if you want a copy of the PowerPoint and just send me an email.
And so, again, for those of you that are interested, everybody on the top right, as well as Mesa, is going through this exact same process. So they have surveys out. They have similar presentations being delivered, whether it was this week or coming months. So for those of you that are curious to see what your neighbors and the numbers look like and want to sort of jump ahead, all of this stuff could probably be found on their websites pretty easily as well. And certainly when we have the full plan together, you'll be able to access all the data in one document. So thank you all for your time. Again, we really appreciate you sticking with this for almost an hour and having this many people. It's a pleasure. So thank you. Have a good evening.
Look at this.